on with the deck of 51, smoking cigarettes and watching Captain Kangaroo. Now don't tell me I've nothing to do.
Alright, since YouTube decided to basically just copyright my last attempt at this into oblivion, I guess I'll try it again. So, this is my argument as to why Trump should live stream, like the FDR Fireside chats, probably an addendum to what said he was going to do today with the, the fake media awards. Something like that. Here is my specific argument that was cut off because YouTube didn't want to play it. Why Trump should start his own internet version of Fireside chats, and why the first one should be watching Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. Trump has a number of useful tools at his disposal, which can help him get over the political and media machine that's working against him. He does exactly that by using Twitter to bypass the media, and set up targets for them to distract themselves with while he otherwise gets his message out. He could increase his reach and influence tenfold, and further bypass the media and go directly to the populace if he streamed an hour a week on whatever his preferred service, and talked about whatever he wanted. Similar to FDR's Fireside chat radio shows. Trump could get directly into millions of American homes and mobile devices, and speak as directly to America as anyone could, more directly than on television, and he could do it as long as he wanted, and say literally whatever he wanted. I think the best way to facilitate that is to set aside some time where he could talk with us, show us what he is doing, and explain his agenda, deal with questions or distract from corrupt media smears. The ability to stream should be a politician's dream, because you can directly control what is being said, and with someone like Trump, millions of people would watch and analyze whatever he had to say. As a bonus, like Twitter, he could give his defenders online a better medium than television to spread his message and further his agenda, and it would help them avoid having to pay attention to the rest of the lying establishment mass media altogether. The best pilot I can think of to start this is by streaming Trump watching and later commenting on the movie Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, a movie from a time when Hollywood cared about virtues and when they believed in America and Americans, before the medium fell into degeneracy, leftism, and the innate desire to hate the flyover country that built them and made them wealthy and admired to begin with. An example to harken back to, and contrast with how terrible Hollywood is now, with their sex scandals and terrible morals and terrible message and lack of passion and lack of originality. People are tired of their double standards, their dismissive elitism, and their utter and complete contempt for the United States of America. You can contrast what the movie Mr. Smith meant and how it treated Americans and our ideals with how Hollywood does nothing but shit on us now. Say something akin to, this is what Hollywood used to be, what they could do, and the power of their art, before it became all about safe money, elitism, and turned into a propaganda wing for the far left. In that movie, an outsider is appointed to a vacant Senate seat and finds himself in D.C. as a senator, but hopefully unprepared for what he would encounter. In good and bad ways. He is such a patriot with such a deep understanding of the ideals and principles behind the founders' actions in government that he is emotionally overwhelmed when he arrives there. To be in the same place as the people he admired so much, to see monuments to them and their actions and ideals everywhere, to be standing directly where history was made, to see the places he had read about and thought about so many times right in front of him, left him in awe and wonder. He was also naive as to how the political system is wrought with corruption, so those high ideals he thought everyone wanted to live up to had long ago been cast away by a cynical, greedy, bitter, and corrupt system. How going to D.C. seems to just ruin people, no matter how those same people enter. While there, he found corrupt people who stopped believing in the principles and virtues that originally made America. However, that he merely believed was enough to break through the jaded outlook of those around him, and allow them to believe it all once again too. He encountered the corrupt political machine, and decided to stand against it, because the ideals he believed in were worth it. That dragon was worth slaying. He encountered wealthy donors controlling a political machine in order to personally enrich themselves, which sounds familiar and relevant to today. The various corporate and foreign donors who buy influence with the United States government. Also, they can skim off the public dollar and use the authorized and legal force of the government as a cudgel against the little guy when it suits them. Exactly the sorts of things the founders warned against. Samuel Adams said, "Men will be free no longer than while they remain virtuous." And the Mr. Smith movie embodies just that. When the politicians, business magnates, and media types exchange virtue and truth for power, wealth, and influence, they doom the government to corruption. When the populace allows this, it corrupts the public too, and the whole damn thing falls apart. You need a virtuous and informed populace to choose virtuous and informed people to be their leaders. That was the specific basis Montesquieu laid out to justify an enlightened social contract based on the notions of liberty. The same basis, along with other Enlightenment philosophy, that the founders used to stir the fires of the revolution and create history's first nation that really was to be for, of, and by the people. The founders specifically and explicitly said many times that without virtue, you can't have good people or a good government. Mr. Smith learns that lesson the hard way. He finds himself on the opposite side of the political machine. They forge fake documents to incriminate him and get him thrown out of the Senate in disgrace. Accuse and convict him of corruption before he can do the same to them. That also sounds familiar, and the idea is still so relevant that it stings. He is about to give up on it all when the woman helping him, Saunders, returns and joins them because his belief in the ideals behind the United States gave her a reason to believe once again too. With her help, he finds a way to take on the political and media machine that is stacked against him. The parallels to Trump are not a perfect one-to-one ratio by any means, but the themes are similar enough. I think that they would be easy for Trump to convince the American people that the machine is working against him just the same way. Use it to illustrate how they stack the deck, lie, manipulate, and buy off everyone they can in order to hide their own corruption, and retain their own death grip on power. Except, unlike Mr. Smith, Trump is well aware of the corruption in D.C. and from the media. He came into it knowing that, and with a plan to dismantle it in his own way, using the same ideals and tenacity Smith used, but in a codified and consistent plan. And one that is slowly starting to work. It is starting to drain the political media and propaganda swamps. Mr. Smith Goes to Washington is in the Library of Congress, so Trump could easily get the rights to stream it if he wanted to. He should do so, and then talk about the parallels to his own experiences. Use it to set up his allies in the alt media, and really drag the lying media and politicians through the mud they so deserve to be dragged through. The filibuster. In order to make something like this successful, I think it is necessary to try to anticipate what the opposition would say and how they would react to it. Such as, the Democrats could try to twist and spin this to say that they're the Smith character, and that the filibuster is obviously a good thing because it stops the corrupt establishment from shutting out the small guy who righteously just wants to have his piece heard. Never mind that the Dems are the most striking example of the corrupt establishment themselves, because in order to be a leftist, you have to twist everything to make it conform to your banal political agenda. The Republicans are not immune to this, and deserve an equal share of ire for their own lack of virtue and their growing indiscretions. So let's talk about the filibuster. The filibuster is presented as being a thing of virtue in Mr. Smith, and for good reason, because in that fictional universe, it was. Because Mr. Smith didn't know anything about legislation nor the rules, he couldn't figure out how to get a word in edgewise. Through the help of his assistant and love interest, Miss Saunders, he was able to take advantage of the filibuster rule and hold the floor until he could say his piece, in an attempt to clear his name from the made-up charges levied against him in order to silence him. That isn't actually how Senate filibusters work, though, so beware taking it too seriously. It was a necessary MacGuffin for the plot and climax in the Mr. Smith movie, but it doesn't really reflect reality. The way filibusters work now is during committee or during a Senate floor debate, you have unlimited time to discuss bills provided a senator keeps talking, only yields the floor to the other senators who also want to keep talking, so bills can't be voted on in committee or on the floor. In order to break a filibuster, senators have to vote for cloture, which means closing the discussion and moving on to vote on the bill. And that, according to current rules, can only be done with 3/5 vote to invoke cloture, which requires 60 Senate votes. If the Senate can't make it to 60 votes, the debate doesn't end until the Senate leadership decides to recess for the day. Hence why so much legislation these days is done via reconciliation, which allows members of each majority in each house to talk to one another and write and set the bill, so the final vote can come without adding extra time to debate. This is done slowly and exclusively to avoid filibusters, going against explicitly what the founders suggested in their writings and how they operated the legislature themselves. It is a method of delaying legislation, trying to push it to the back of the pile or fill up the debate surrounding it with so much chuffa that it can't be voted on properly. This isn't a constitutional thing either. There is nothing in the Constitution which allows or forbids a filibuster. That comes from the way the Senate rules were formed when the Senate begins its first session in a new legislative year. The Senate itself was not founded with this rule, as it did not become anything resembling its current form until Senate Rule 22 was changed in 1975. It set the threshold vote at 60 to invoke cloture, and changed the way filibusters were done dramatically. Now, senators don't even have to talk, or be on the floor to talk, to delay a vote. They can simply state their intent to filibuster, then leave. They can now filibuster from their offices or even their house, because you don't have to hold the floor, or fill time to do it. Just stating your intent is enough to effectively shut down the legislative process, utterly and completely, forever. You don't even have to put any effort into it like Mr. Smith did. This was never the founders' intent. They specifically warned against what would become a filibuster, and even using rules like the 60 vote for cloture for day-to-day legislative business. The House of Representatives dropped the filibuster decades ago, taking the founders' advice so eloquently laid out in Federalist No. 58 and Federalist No. 22. The author of the Federalist No. 58, James Madison knows a thing or two about the Constitution, as it was basically his idea to begin with, and most of it came directly from his pen. Writing under the pseudonym Publius, he said, "In all cases where justice or the general good might require new laws to be passed, or active measures to be pursued, the fundamental principle of a free government would be reversed. It would be no longer the majority that would rule, the power would be transferred to the minority." Or Alexander Hamilton, who in Federalist No. 22 said, "To give a minority a negative upon the majority, which is always the case where more than a majority is requisite to a decision, is, in its tendency, to subject the sense of the greater number to that of the lesser." The necessity of unanimity in public bodies, or of something approaching towards it, has been founded upon a supposition that it would contribute to security. But its real operation is to embarrass the administration, to destroy the energy of the government, and to substitute the pleasure, caprice, and artifices of an insignificant, turbulent, or corrupt junto to the regular deliberations and decisions of a respectable majority. It is often, by the impracticality of obtaining the concurrence of necessary number of votes, kept in a state of inaction. Its situation must always savor weakness, or sometimes border upon anarchy. So we know the founders were suspicious of allowing the legislative minority power over the majority, and knew that it caused gridlock and stagnated the government, which would be nothing more than a corrupting influence on said government, but also the lack of virtue on the people the government reflected. The notion, which comes to us today via the filibuster and cloture, was something we know historically breaks governments and makes the consent of the governed, the very bedrock of the U.S. social contract, moot and unrespectable. So before the left makes the case, allow me to counter it by urging and advocating the removal of the 60-vote rule in the Senate, and the move to a 51-vote cloture, as the founders did it, and as they intended us to do it. The best way to do this would be to convince the next majority leader in the Senate to change the rules from the onset, once a new sitting Congress is convened after this year. Each new Congress sets their own rules, though typically they merely just adopt the previous Congress's rules for convenience. The change should come in when they set up Rule 22, by removing the 60-vote threshold for cloture completely, and changing it back to a simple majority of 51 votes. Don't let anyone fool you. The left argued the same point when they were in a majority control, and did effectively change Rule 22 in order to remove the 60-vote cloture from the rule itself, as it pertained to judicial appointments. They threw out the rule because the Republicans were interfering with their ability to vote on Obama's judicial appointees. Likewise, the Republicans, when they got a majority, expanded the rule to apply to Supreme Court nominations as well. Both sides were filibustering the normal work of government, and both sides changed the rule to allow them to get on with it. Why pussyfoot around it? Remove the 60-vote rule and stop having to worry about it completely. It is what the founders wanted because they knew a functioning government was more important than a perpetually frozen government, especially when the freeze is something levied by the minority to effectively control the majority. With that, I thank you if you stuck through this all the way. I hope you like the movie, and I hope you're buttressed against the counterattack should anything come of this idea. And I hope you feel the near overwhelming rapture at the prospect of a good, strong, and functioning America, as I do after I watch this movie. I think something like this, where the expert storytelling and artistic vision of the filmmakers can better express what is good about America, as a people and as an ideal than I ever could, is necessary, and at the moment a completely underutilized tool. I hope it somehow makes its way to President Trump too, because I think him doing something like this, then repeating